Hi guys, welcome to another online Pieandbelle class. Today we're going to be doing glass bottles. If you'd like to come to our regular class, please look in my bio and it will tell you all the details including my email and phone number. So today we're going to start off with this Coca-Cola bottle, but we're also going to look at the more looser version I've done on the left of a filled glass. The first thing we are going to start thinking about doing is drawing this image. Now with both of these items you really need to think about how that they are the same both sides. They're very symmetrical, so you need to put a line down the middle of your paper in order to get your shape down. Now I'm going to draw quite heavily just so that you guys can see, but when you're drawing remember to use a HB pencil and use it super light, really faint, so that you can barely see it, just so that you've got something to work from really. So there I go, drawing the straight line straight down the middle, and this will help me get the shapes either side. That's just an example of how light you should be drawing. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at the sizes coming out of both edges. So to get the body of it and the neck of it, I'm just going to put in little markings, but I'm going to see how far they come from that central line and make them. And I'm also going to look at things like how wide the bottle is at that point and how wide it comes down to the bottom. So I can see it goes in a little bit there, and then I can see it's slightly wider again at the bottom, and that measurement at the bottom is about the same as that measurement in the middle. Then I'm going to join these up, and then I'm going to work at the top just at that little kind of neck bit. But I'm just checking that curve there is quite tricky to get the same both sides, so do work on it a little bit. People do tend to kind of rush past the actual drawing part of it, which is really not a good idea, because then you'll find, especially with something that's as symmetrical as a bottle, that you'll come to paint it all in, and when you look back at it you'll realise that one side's slightly wider than the other and it will just not look correct, and you'll always just see that. So do take some time. I mean, I'm looking where I was drawing it from was kind of sitting back. Obviously the camera was above me, but I would say sit up with it, have it so that you're kind of facing it. What I'm going to put now in is the ellipses. That's what the little circular bits are called. And I'm going to do the full ellipse. The reason for this is because it just makes it easier to get even. So even though I've only got that curve going across the top and I haven't got that inner curve, I'm actually just going to do the full kind of circular shape, because that helps me get that proper curve. I know it's not going to end with a kind of right angle or the wrong shape at the end. It just helps you out. So ellipse is just a word for a circle that's squished. Like if you look above at a cup like that, it's circular, but when you turn it slightly to the side, the circle gets squished, and that's what we call an ellipse. So I can see now where my actual bottle is. That's the bottom curve and that's the top curve, but then those middle lines I can take out. I can start building my little bottle in there now. Still at this point you're not going to want to be doing very heavy line drawing. You're going to have it really light, and then you can just use a rubber and take those middle lines out. So because I'm going to do this bottle that is this kind of greeny colour, this right hand bottle, rather than this empty bottle that's kind of the purpley colour there, the purpley grey colour, I wanted to do this greeny one just because it had slightly more interesting colours going on in it. Plus I have got that grey tone in there anyway, so it will help. I can show you how to get that out of the colours anyway. And what I'm going to do is come in with some masking fluid where any really white pops are. You don't have to do this point, you can just take out the colour or leave that colour white of the paper. But if you have a real shiny object, it does help just to put a little bit of masking fluid in, just to keep those areas really white. So you can see where I'm looking at that white pop down the centre there, and just a little bit up there as well. Now I haven't put the logo in at this point. I'm going to do the whole bottle and then work on the logo once I've got that whole kind of base colour of the bottle in, just because I don't want to be interfering with what I'm doing. I don't want the wash to kind of stop and start. I just want the whole thing to go all the way down. So you can see the difference between these two colours. This is very kind of purpley grey, and this base colour is very pale turquoise green. So I'm going to have to make up that turquoise green, which I'm going to use turquoise and lemon yellow. and I'm also there making up the grey, which would be the base of the other bottle. So I'm using burnt umber and ultramarine. Now if you mix these two colours together in equal parts, you'll get a really nice grey tone. And I think I was showing that for an example of maybe the base colour I could use with the other bottle, but also I am going to use that in this colour anyway. So I'm adding more of the ultramarine to it because it wasn't quite bluey grey enough. And always have a tester. Now I'm just going to test on my paper, but you can see that would be a perfectly acceptable base colour for this. Although to be honest, I would probably put a little bit of pink in there too, because the reason you making your grey is because when those colours are on, if they do separate out a little bit, all those little colours will pop out, so you might get little pops of blue or pink, and it's really, really nice to have that rather than a made grey. So you can see I'm showing you that the base grey there I can actually use in my bottle as well, but I'm not going to pop it purple because my bottle already has a really nice green in it, so I feel like it has enough colours in it for it already. But that turquoise, that base turquoise there, is not quite greeny enough. Now I am going to make it a little bit more green with the yellow, but I don't want it to be a perfect green, which would be equal measures of that turquoise and yellow. I just want it still to go towards the blue a little bit more, but that will be my base colour. Now I'm using the corner of my paper for my tester, but you definitely could use a little spare piece of paper so that you've got a nice normal picture that's really, really pretty and not got any like weird interference with it. I was just doing this as a little example. So I'm now making a thicker version of that kind of greeny colour because I want this base tone that I'm putting in over the entire bottle. I want it to be two-tone, so what that means is I'm going to paint the entire bottle in with a light green, and then I'm going to go over it in the darker areas of the bottle with the dark green whilst it's still wet. So the first thing I'm doing is wetting the entire bottle shape. This enables me to have a little bit more time to play around and push the colour around. If you've ever tried watercolour before, this is definitely a good one for beginners if you put the water down first, just because what it does is helps you have that time to push the colour around. And if you accidentally, you can see up there I've put a little bit too much colour, pulling it out, pushing it around. You wouldn't have that time if you hadn't put the water down first. What you'll find is that it just goes where it goes and it's sunk into the paper and you can't move it around anymore. So definitely kind of put the water on first, and then you can push this colour around. I'm going to push it all over. I should have really used a slightly larger brush for this, but I was just using what I had at the time. And I'm pushing it all over, and then when I've completely covered it and it's still nice and wet, I'm going to come in with a darker green, that darker green that I've made up, and I'm going to put it in where I can see it's slightly darker in the picture. Now with the darker green and this green, it is your base colour, which means you are going to tidy it up as you come into it anyway. So if it hasn't gone perfectly into the lines or there's little jaggedy bits around the edges, really don't worry yourself too much about it, because you know you can tidy that up as we go on. So you can see I'm plonking the colour in. You can see it looks kind of hideous, but what I'm going to do is start pushing that around. So you can see now I'm going to push it into the places I want it, and I can do this because it is wet. That's what you need to be thinking about, to how to keep your paper nice and damp so that you have that time frame to push the colour where you want it. So I'm just going to push it all over the place. Get that kind of base level of dark, which is round both sides in. And you can see where I'm tapping to deposit little bits of colour as well. If you tap the brush onto your paper, you will deposit the colour. And again, it is going to look kind of naff at this stage. It's just going to look like a weird green blob. But don't overly worry yourself about it. Please stop worrying about the periods of time where it looks kind of naff. It's always going to have times where it looks naff. So I've let that layer dry, and now I'm going to come in and put my logo in because I've got my base colour in, and I know that I won't be kind of stopping and starting then. So I'm just really getting a general idea of it in, because I can touch it more in when I'm painting later. However, if you feel a lot more like you want to have it put in perfectly because that helps you out, then you can. Now you can definitely see how the edges are all really awful on this now, but I'm going to sort that out in a minute. I'm making up a darker colour there for that. But firstly I'm going to make up this kind of grey tone colour that comes in here and at the top there. So I'm going to make that up again with that kind of blue and that brown, which I've already got some of there, but I think I'm going to pop it towards blue a little bit more just because I like blue more than I like brown and it's my picture. But if I wanted it to be completely perfectly accurate, I probably would keep it an even tone between those blue and those browns, but when it's a picture like this, you can have a little bit of fun with it and play around with it. So I'm getting some of those darker green pops in first, just down the bottom there. And you can see I'm applying the colour at its thickest, then I'm using clean water to wash it out if I don't like the harshness of the line. Now this bottom area here is kind of got loads of weird shapes in it, but also that far corner there and that other corner down the bottom there, they're really dark. So as much as I'm applying colour there, I'm not overly fussing myself for it to be absolutely perfect, because I know I'm going to just cover it up with a load of other colour in a minute anyway. So that's always something to think of. You know, if you've got something that's really annihilated by something else, don't spend time making that layer look really perfect, because what you want is the kind of the layers of colour to go into it nicely, but you don't need that whole bit to be filled out and look absolutely perfect, because you're going to cover it up anyway. So now I'm just bringing in some of that green where I can see it, that kind of darker toned green, because the whole base of the bottle is that really pale minty green, but then it has these little pops of the kind of darker turquoisey green, especially in that base there you can see, and around the edges. But I'm just putting them in where I can see them. So of course down here at the bottom, and even at this point you can see the bottom of that. I'm still using a large brush, so I haven't got as much control over it, but I'm just putting it in because I know I'm going to go over that later anyway and sort it all out. Now when it comes to putting in these grey colours, you can see very much so I put the colour in and then I use some of that clean water to wash it out, and then I'm just depositing bits where I can see it's slightly darker, and I'm just following the shapes. Just follow the shapes. You can see that there, it goes into like an upside down Y shape and has a bit next to it. So if you can see that, put it in. Now what you want to do is use a damp brush to get rid of those harsh edges though, so around the edges there you want to take it. Oh, I'm using my small brush there just to take out that little white kind of line through the middle. But what I'm saying is, with the edges of there, if you've kind of used the paint watery enough, I think that's one of the classic things with beginners, make sure the paint is watery enough, and then you have got some time to kind of get rid of edges and stuff that you don't like. So I think even I come back in more so with water there, because I can see that I don't like how that's looking, especially where it's really harsh, because there isn't really any harshness in that picture. It's very soft, even though there's definite shapes. It's only really harsh when you get round to those edges of the sides at the bottom where they have those kind of black marks in there. And I'm starting to bring that colour in where I can see there is kind of weird shapes above the logo. And you can see there when I put it in and I've dabbed it out because it's slightly too vibrant. You know, you're playing around with it all the time. You just want it to kind of have the look and effect that you want, and nothing is really wrong when it comes to this. You know, you can play around with it and make it look however you want it to look, and yours could look completely different to someone else that's done this exact same tutorial, and that's not wrong. That's just your own style coming through. So now what I'm going to do is start bringing in those darker tones. The first thing I wanted to do was get those dark edges in at the bottom, because that's the darkest area there. So I've put some water in and I've let the kind of dark colour splay out. And sometimes I do work this way round. I know they say work dark to light, but my favourite thing to do sometimes is put the absolute darkest area in, so that then I get a little bit of an idea of how dark I want to go with the rest of it, because a lot of the time you can kind of put all the other elements in and then you get to that bit that's really dark and suddenly you think, oh, I should have made the rest of it so much more dark. So sometimes I do put those dark elements in at a point so I can have a bit of an idea what to work to, and the rest of the picture kind of comes from that point. So now I'm just following these shapes. Now I'll tend to wash out a lot less when I'm in these kind of shapes, because obviously I am trying to get more of that kind of specific shape going on that I can see. So I am keeping it quite harsh and not washing out quite as much as I was with the green and the pale grey. And it's about this time you can start seeing your bottle build up. The best thing to do is to take steps away from your image every now and again and have a look at it from a little bit of a distance, because it can look completely different from a distance. And also when you're looking at something from a distance, you can see where the shadows and lights are a lot easier than if you're looking really up close. You know, when you're following shapes and stuff, you can't really see what the shapes are forming until you take a step back and look at it from a bit of a distance. So now I'm just darkening some of those middle spots in where I can see that it goes all the way down the centre with that darker point going into that other colour that I've already put in. And I am using the colour to my advantage. When it was darker at the top, I was using it for those darker pops, and then when it's getting down to that next area where it's a little bit lighter, the paint's already run out a bit, so it's gone a little bit paler. That's, you know, you're just playing around with it. With watercolour, it's all about playing around. I mean, I realised that I hadn't put in that kind of greyish area down the left-hand side, so I'm putting that in now. I should have probably put that in on stage 2, but this is the thing with watercolour, you know, especially when you're doing something like this. It is quite a complex image when you're looking at all the little bits in it, so sometimes you have to come in and put little bits in, but if they're not touching wet paint, you can. You know, you can only work where you're working, as long as you're not going over 2 bits that are coloured together. So, you know, as much as it is a kind of, you know, detailed picture that I'm doing, I'm also having a bit of fun with it. Like I said, I popped that grey towards towards blue a little bit more, just because I liked that blue with that turquoise. It kind of gave me quite an oceany vibe, and I felt like it was a lot more of a pretty picture than if it was just the pale grey in there. So, you know, do make the picture your own. This is your picture you're creating. You don't have to do it exactly the same as I'm doing. This is just a guide to get you started. So now I've made up my really dark black with the same blue and the brown, and I'm starting to fill in much more of those really dark kind of lines I'm seeing in there. And you can see how I'm swapping up. I did 2 little black bits at the top there, and then I went down and washed it out with the grey into that next bit, and then I've come back in with the dark. You know, there's no reason why you have to do it in the stages. If you're quite an impatient person like I am, then you kind of sometimes mush all the stages in together and do bits and bobs where you're seeing it. When you're starting to see the picture come together, you start putting different bits in and thinking, I can make that darker or that bolder as you're going along, and that's perfectly fine and acceptable to play around with images like that. So again, I can see where I want the darkness, and sometimes I'm putting it in as a definite line like I did on the top there, and then that next section I put it in and washed it out. This is really personal preference at this point, where you're kind of keeping it harsh and where you're softening it out. I knew I definitely wanted to come in really dark down this base bit and really emphasize the shape. So this is where we were talking about that base that's all kind of jaggedy. This is where I'm really gonna actually spend some time with my tiny brush and start to think about getting it really neat down there and start getting in that dark kind of base bit. Now, I don't take this picture all the way to the end, but I think you can get a general idea of what I'm trying to achieve with it anyway. I mean, really now I'm at this point with the tiny brush, I could actually take all that masking fluid off, which I know is on there, and actually see where the light source is, because I'm working with a smaller brush now. I wouldn't actually need that masking fluid on there because I've got so much more control of where the colour is going. But I think at this point I just wanted to take it to a point that I feel like you could progress yourselves, because I know that you'd be able to just understand where you're getting the logo in and all that kind of business. So obviously all I did was kind of darken even further so that, and I did the logo in exactly the same manner as we did the bottle basically. And now I'm going to just give you a quick demo on how to do this kind of much looser style of glass. So this is much nicer if you haven't got as much time. Now when we're doing a loose style object, we want to make our colours up first. It's more important to have the colours made first. So you can see here I'm doing exactly the same as I did before. Even though I only want those base circles, I'm still putting the full circle in so that I know it's correct, and then I'm taking out the extra ones. So I've got the glass and the liquid in there. Now the first thing I'm going to do is make up my grey, which I'm making up with the brown and the ultramarine, the burnt umber and ultramarine. And I'm also going to make some other colours, because this loose glass, in my base layer, in my first layer, I want there to be multiple colours coming in. So the first thing I'm going to do is fill in with grey, and then I'm going to touch in with the turquoise I've already got up there, and I might come in with a little bit of that blue also. But you could put any colours in here. So I've done glasses this way, where I've just done the grey and then touched in colours whilst it's really wet. And I've done it with purples, yellows, because if you imagine you've got your grey of your glass, your base of your glass, but all the other colours could be anything around that glass that's reflecting it. So if you are doing a glass in a full picture, for example, and there's things that are yellow to the left of it, then whilst you're doing this grey layer, you touch in yellow to the left hand side. If you've got something orange to the right hand side, you touch in orange, and you just splay it around whilst it's still wet. And this is a really good way of getting that kind of general hint of a reflection, which I think is really nice. So you can see I did green in the top there and blue in the bottom. You could literally do this with any colours. So in that bottle that you can just see on the right there, it's also got purple in it, turquoise and blue in that top layer, and also the white shines are because I've put masking fluid in. So this is just giving you an idea of how you could get a reflection in. You want to use the same grey, but you want to wash around the edges, and then when you've got a liquid in there, you're actually going to touch the colour of the liquid into that reflection and push it around. So you can see how that's kind of splaying out there. So I've got that kind of grey reflection of the glass, and then I've got that yellow, and I am going to make that orange in a minute, but I wanted it to kind of go orange to yellow, so I'm going to touch the orange in and have a bit more control over it. So now we've got our base layer in, you're going to start to lip out the sides of the glass, and what you're going to do is do the base of the lip, and you're going to put the colour in, and using clear water wash it away like that, so you get the shape. If you see what I'm doing again at the top, I've put that line in and I'm just washing it out, so you get that nice shape of the glass without having to do it in the first layer, which would obviously be completely impossible. You're still creating that lip and that shape of the surface of the glass, but you're just putting in the colour in a thick colour and then washing it out into the rest of the glass. So it gives you that really super fine outline rather than a thick outline. If I was doing this kind of crisscrossy pattern, I would mask it, but obviously with that masking, what I did do was I masked it and then I started filling it in a bit more. Remember, when you take the masking fluid off, that's not the end of your picture. That bit, that stroke down there, I did mask and then take off, but these other ones, I took the masking off and then I refilled them in. So what I'm saying is, when you've got masking fluid on a picture like this, you may find it's a little too harsh, it's a little too bright, and you are perfectly allowed to come in and put more painting over the top of that. That's why it's masking fluid rather than candle wax. So now I'm getting that first layer of liquid in, and I've used a yellow base, and then I brought some of that orange over the top, and I'm also bringing that orangey colour. You can see I've added the orange and I've washed it out into that reflection. So once that's dry, you do the second layer in exactly the same way, that bottom layer of liquid in exactly the same way with the yellow and the red, or the yellow and the orange, sorry. And now I'm coming in with a heavier orange, and I'm going to do the exact same as I did with the lip of the glass up the top to separate the two layers of the drink, just to give yourself a bit more definition. And this is a super fast way of getting a glass of liquid done. It's putting those layers in and then literally coming around and neatening it all up. It's literally a two-stage watercolour. So obviously I did darken some of these little pops out here, but the other one was much more of a layered bottle. Thank you for watching our demo. Goodbye.